If Donald Trump ever saw this video, he would really hate it. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video which I'm going to talk about history, how it works, revisionist history, and this book which I read for Nonfiction November, Black AF History, The Unwhitewashed Story of America by Michael Harriot. So before I talk about the book, which I'll share some brief thoughts with you here in a minute, before I talk about the book, I want to talk about this idea of what history is and what history isn't, and what revisionist history is and what revisionist history isn't. So people like Donald Trump seem to think that we learned everything we needed to know about American history sometime around 1950, and we put all that stuff into American history books, and then everything that we've learned since then, and every history book that's been written after that that has challenged that idea from, let's say, the 1950s, is a work of revisionist history, and that must be wrong. I'll just point out that when we revise something, that means we're trying to get it right. And so revisionist histories are attempts to get it right. Some revisionist histories, approach this very seriously and, examine very serious issues in minutia to figure out if we were right or wrong. Like, what was the actual cause of the American Revolution? Were the colonists worried about Great Britain outlawing slavery, or was it really this whole idea of representation and, who got to make laws for the colonies and not? Those are really serious ideas that really kind of, I think affect how we think about our country. Now, if you take the 1950s version, the American Revolution was all about taxes. We didn't want to pay taxes, so we rebelled against Great Britain, and we fought a war, and we gained our independence. I just want you to think for a minute how kind of petty it would be for the United States to fight a war of independence, for the American colonies to fight a war of independence, just so they didn't have to pay taxes. And then how ridiculous it was, they turned around then and created their own tax system. This is one of those things that I think is important to understand that happens with history. It has to be revised. It has to be changed. We have to look at new information because history isn't definitive. It isn't any more definitive than science is. We wouldn't want to go back to our scientific knowledge in the 1950s and say, well, that's when science ended. We shouldn't do that with history either. We shouldn't come up with this idea that the right history was the history taught at a certain point in time in the past, and everything since then has been taught in a way or has been wrong, or in some ways has diminished American history. I firmly believe, as somebody who spent a good portion of my life studying American history, that if you're going to love the United States of America, you have to love it for all of its flaws. You have to love it for all the horrible things it's done, because I think then that helps us see and hopefully push for the United States to achieve much better. And if we just stay with this idea of American history that we learned in 5th grade, frozen forever in amber, then we cannot progress, because we will not take in new ideas. We will not think about different approaches. And this is essential in history, because the version of history we get depends on who's telling the story. Not just on who's telling the story, who was alive or witnessed at the time, but when they're telling their story. I just wrote a book about World War II soldiers. It's based largely on what they had to say about their war experiences. But I'm well aware that all of them were writing and talking about their war experiences decades after the war was over. This then influences, all the years in between their service up to the point where they talk, influence their ideas about their behavior, about what went on, about the events, and all those kind of things are influenced by that. So, even though those are primary sources, they're not pure, and no source is, and neither is any source of history. And me, in writing about those World War II soldiers, attempted to, show the humanity of those soldiers, and in doing so, I brought my bias into play in talking about those soldiers' stories. And every historian does that. Every historian who's ever written anything, or biographer who's ever written anything about somebody from the past, has done that and does do that. Writing history is a creative work. You're creating a narrative out of, the facts that you have access to, or the facts that you've chosen to emphasize. And in doing so, you are bringing to bear your bias. So one of the things I think is important in terms of studying and learning and thinking about American history is to, expose yourself to as many different opinions and many different ideas about American history as you possibly can. I read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States a long time ago, and And that definitely influenced me to rethink some of the things that have been taught. But that doesn't mean I accept everything Howard Zinn had to say as being absolutely right or 100% correct. Because, obviously it's not. And obviously he was writing from his point of view. In a similar way, I read Black AF History by Michael Harriot. And what I found here is a work of history that I think is incredibly valuable because I think it is a corrective. In other words, yes, it's revisionist history. It's hoping to help us revise our understanding of history, particularly as it pertains to Black Americans and the history of Black Americans in the United States. So it essentially traces that history from colonization all the way up to more or less modern times, and it puts its focus on what Black people were doing. What were Black people doing that helped create the colonies and make them economically successful? How did Black people respond to the American Revolution? What did Black people do to bring about the Civil War and the end of slavery? How did Black people challenge segregation and Jim Crow laws? How did, all those kinds of subjects we know from American history, but it's from the point of view and the emphasis is on the activities of Black Americans. It's not that it doesn't talk about, the things that were done to Black Americans, but it puts its emphasis on the achievements. It puts its emphasis on the things that Black Americans did to survive, to advance their cause, to achieve greater economic and civil rights in the United States of America. And as such, it's incredibly valuable because it tells a story of people, that I didn't know about. It tells a story of these people in ways that I hadn't thought about it. It tells the story of events from a different point of view, and in doing so, it helps me to revise and correct the ideas I had about those events, about those people before, and that has to be better. It has to be better to get more than one perspective, even if I disagree sometimes with the perspective, or I don't think Harriot gets it exactly right. The value in reading these books is in that revision that we all need to do to get away from these ideas that were created a long time ago that we know now are not true, in the sense they don't tell the whole story, or they tell the story from only one point of view. So I think the book is incredibly valuable. It's also written in a really humorous manner, and it's really funny, and it's really easy to read, and yet at the same time, I found it to be incredibly powerful and incredibly important. And I'm glad I read it. I'm glad that as a result of reading that book, I've revised some of my ideas, or I'm in the process of revising some of my ideas and rethinking some of the things I thought. That's what we should be doing with history, just like we do with science or anything else. We should constantly be testing the ideas we have by exposing ourselves to new ideas and to different ideas and different points of view. And that really is where I think Black AF history is so incredibly valuable. Now, having said all that and get into this video, no doubt some of you think, oh, well, there goes Brian again, social justice warrior. He's out here, virtue signaling about all this kind of stuff. And he's taken in all these ideas from these books written by Black authors. And now he hates the United States of America. And I hope I've taken in the ideas of any author, of any color and any race that's valuable and helps me reevaluate and reassess my ideas about the United States and its history. I hope that that's true, but I also don't think that reading one book or reading 10 books or 100 books from any one point of view should be how we come to our conclusions. And it's no more wrong to be influenced by a work of revisionist history like this than it is like Black AF history, than it is to be influenced by those old history textbooks that everybody tells us we should be going back to so we can love our country. You can't love the United States if you don't love the reality of the United States. And Black AF History is one of those books which helps you come closer to understanding the reality of the United States. Anyway, there you go. There is my review of Black AF History and discussion of revisionist history. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching. Hi, Zelda. You're late.